In 2019, Hideo Kojima released his first major project following his exit from longtime publisher Konami. The game was Death Stranding and released to a very mixed reception among the gaming audience. This was truly a game where either you loved its uniqueness as the first Strand-style game or hated what critics would come to call a boring and overly complex walking simulator. Case in point, IGN's reviewer gave the game a 6.8 out of 10, a D according to American grading system, but IGN's audience would ultimately vote it as their game of the year. Flash forward 6 years to 2025, and a strange thing has happened. Death Stranding 2 on the beach has received significantly more positive reception compared to the first among the gaming critical journalist community, sitting at an 89% on the Metacritic and 95% recommended on OpenCritic. Reviewers love Death Stranding 2 so much that it would genuinely be shocking if it is not one of the main contenders for Game of the Year at the TGAs by year's end. But whereas the first game might have been a controversial title that was well beloved among the broader gaming community, the second game following the adventures of Sam Porter Bridges has seen a cooler reception among the broader audience. What happened? What went wrong? And how worried should those who loved Hideo Kojima be about the future of one of gaming's greatest auteurs? This is Mercenary Publishing, and we're happy to present to you our thoughts on Death Stranding 2 on the beach. Sam Porter Bridges. Death Stranding 1 and 2 are stories following the adventures of the player-controlled character and protagonist, Sam Porter Bridges, played by now famous Hollywood actor Norman Reedus, who came to widespread acclaim with his role as Daryl Dixon on The Walking Dead. Sam made for an effective protagonist in the first Death Stranding and is a major reason why so many people love the original game. Alas, some of the biggest problems with Death Stranding 2 are due to Sam, but you need to understand his character arc from the first game to see why he is such a problematic character in the second. The story of the first Death Stranding is the story of how a man who shuns connections comes to appreciate the need for building relationships with other people. At the start of the game, Sam Bridges is a loner who doesn't just shun other people, but suffers from aphantasmophobia, the fear of being touched. Sam's phobia is so bad that combined with his supernatural dooms condition that allows him to be revived from death, Sam's body suffers from a severe allergic reaction that marks him wherever other people touch his bare skin. So what does Sam have to do in a game about the importance of connections between people? Learn to break down the walls he has placed around himself and make bridges with other people, which he does by working as a delivery man porter traveling across the country. If you haven't already figured it out, that's the whole meaning behind his name, Sam Porter Bridges, or Sam the Porter who makes bridges with other people. And that is exactly what Sam does throughout the game. Sam, who is content to live an isolated and solitary life at the start of Death Stranding, is surrounded by friends and newfound family by game's end. In true Kojima fashion, meaning symbolically and literally, because Sam adopts his bridge baby that he used throughout the game to travel across the United States as his own daughter. Couple Lou, with the seemingly romantic relationship he now has with Fragile and the friendships he has forged with characters like Deadman, Lockney, Hartman, and all of the people he made deliveries to throughout the game, and Sam is a changed man by the end of Death Stranding 1 compared to where he was at the start. Which makes Death Stranding 2 such a frustrating experience because it commits the most common writing sin a sequel can make. Sam reverts to being the same character he was in Death Stranding 1 for much of the story of Death Stranding 2, and the story is significantly worse for it. Is it because Hideo Kojima didn't fully think through his plans for Sam as a character? Doubtful. No, the true failure of Sam as a protagonist in Death Stranding 2 further highlights what many think are some worrying trends when it comes to Hideo Kojima's modern production habits, a problem that has grown worse and worse since Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. In Death Stranding 1, Sam Porter Bridges was a pretty cold, even emotionless character. In the context of the story that Hideo Kojima was trying to tell, this made sense. Sam was a man who felt he had been used and manipulated by his adoptive family growing up, and also a man grieving over what he assumed to be the suicide of his wife and the loss of the child she was pregnant with. Combine that with his body's allergic reaction to physical touching, and his aloofness made sense. However, this is actually the second time Kojima wrote this kind of character. The last major project Hideo Kojima developed before leaving Konami was Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. In many ways, Death Stranding is a sequel to MGS5, Kojima's attempt to perfect the formula he started with the last major release in the Metal Gear Solid franchise. Gameplay-wise, Death Stranding was a clear improvement over The Phantom Pain, but by looking back, you can also tell that Death Stranding was a major attempt at writing a main character who is mostly silent and left up to the player's interpretation. Metal Gear Solid 5 is critically acclaimed for its gameplay, but there really aren't that many people that would defend the main character of the game, Punished Snake. It's also a source of controversy for many fans in the gaming community because MGS5 saw the replacement of the actor for Solid Snake and Big Boss, David Hayter, with famed Hollywood actor Kiefer Sutherland. Now, while some people try to defend this decision since Punished Snake is actually just a man who has been tricked into believing he is Big Boss, the cutscenes that feature the real Big Boss are also played by Kiefer Sutherland in MGS5. So what's the point of this tangent? Well, Kiefer Sutherland actually does a great job as Punished Snake in MGS5, for the little we get out of him. For the average player, it takes about 50 hours to complete Metal Gear Solid 5. How much dialogue do we get out of our leading man, Punished Snake? 5 minutes. Metal Gear Solid 5 is a 50-hour journey following the story of a main character who has less than 5 minutes of dialogue in the entire game. Sure, some of this can be ascribed to the nature of the story Kojima was trying to tell, including the meta twist that you, the player, are the real hero of the MGS universe. But the more likely explanation is that with the growing costs of modern game development, Kojima was trying to save on time, money, resources, and the work needed from a major Hollywood actor. Here's where the gaming industry is finding itself sinking further and further into a difficult mire. Up until the late 6th generation and early 7th generation of consoles, characters in video games best served by dedicated voiceovers. However, with the advent of high-definition graphics and advancing technologies, game development evolved to feature the use of performance capture. Through a specialized process akin to what is used in modern movies, a digital character can be mapped to capture not just the voice, but the facial and body movements of the actor playing the character. With this evolution, major AAA games need not only good vocal actors, but good all-round actors who can truly embody the characters of a video game. The upside of modern performance capture? Characters are more lifelike than ever, to the point that a well-written and performed video game character can be even more memorable and heart-touching than a Hollywood movie character. The downside of modern performance capture? Capturing and implementing such a performance is both expensive and time-consuming, resulting in many games trying to cut corners when it comes to performances of major characters. And that explains what is turning out to be a concerning trend among Kojima's protagonists. Let's tie this all together and get the main problem with Death Stranding 2's main character. MGS5 was Kojima's first attempt at making an open-world game, especially once featuring a big Hollywood actor as the leading protagonist. The end result was the lackluster and underwhelming Punished Snake, who many would agree is the most boring and undeveloped protagonist in the Metal Gear Solid series. However, it seemed that Kojima may have learned from some of his mistakes with Death Stranding 1. Sure, there was still an awkwardness when it came to Sam and how it interacted with both the world and other characters, but Kojima leaned into the shortcomings and made a beautiful, brilliant story from it. The fact that Sam actually talks for more than 5 minutes in the game certainly did a lot to help in that regard, and by the end, Death Stranding features a relatable, inspiring, and fleshed-out character in Death Stranding 1. So it's extremely disappointing to see the return of a passive, aloof, and largely unreactive protagonist in Death Stranding 2. Sam isn't a person for much of this game, to the point that it's a struggle to even call him a character. He has some great moments here and there, but they are few and far between. Worst of all are the moments where you do expect some sort of reaction out of him, and, as was the case in MGS5, he just doesn't do or say anything. There are many examples of this throughout the game where Sam just doesn't respond to things. But the worst offense is when interacting with the president of APAC. For much of the game's story, you are connecting the Chiral network in the service of the Automated Public Assistance Company, a corporation helping Sam and company expand the Chiral network throughout the world. However, about two-thirds of the way into the game, the president of APAC begins to contact you privately, alerting you to the fact that there might be a mole within Drawbridge, someone who is secretly working behind the scenes to sabotage your mission. Sure, the president clearly comes off as a bad guy, not to be trusted, but during the game, Higgs keeps getting the drop on Sam, and around the same time the president starts talking about a traitor. It turns out that the crew of Drawbridge have been actively lying to Sam and indulging in his fantasy that Lou was in his BB pod. What is Sam's reaction to the potential of a traitor? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Sam doesn't ask any probing questions. Sam doesn't accuse the president of having any nefarious intentions. Sam doesn't confide in Fragile or Dolman, the two members he should trust the most. This is a huge subplot that gets built up through this section of the game, and Sam doesn't say a word about it until the president of APAC comes and reveals the truth regarding the mission to expand the Chiral network. Why? Why is Sam written like this? Is this because the APAC subplot was one of the later revisions that Kojima made to the script following the pandemic? Is it because Norman Reedus was too busy, or because it would have cost too much to make him more reactive? Or does Kojima sincerely believe that having such a blank, empty protagonist makes for a better experience? If it's the first, then we can only hope that Kojima resists the urge to revise his script as much in his games going forward. If it's the second, then we can only hope Kojima doesn't go for such a prominent and busy actor to be his protagonist for his next game. And if it's the third, then there is cause for concern that Fizzint, the next action espionage game from Kojima, will likely be a disappointing continuation of bad habits that first showed their face in Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. Having said all that, there's actually more to say about Sam and what his central struggle is in this game. Death Stranding 2 is a game that deals with the themes of loss and how we handle our grief. But because that is a theme that touches on nearly everything in the game, we need to tackle a different subject first. A subject that, despite all of the attention it received during the game's marketing, is one that felt like an afterthought by the game's release. Let's talk about APAC and the question, should we have connected? Death Stranding 2 was marketed with the following question: should we have connected? Hideo Kojima is considered an auteur, and for good reason. Love him or hate him, no one can deny that the man is an artist who always had something to say. Each of the Metal Gear Solid games are well regarded for many reasons, but in large part because of how they serve as interesting pieces of art that provide commentary on the world and its potential future. Death Stranding 1, much like other games created by Hideo Kojima, was strangely prophetic. Released on November 8, 2019, Death Stranding would come out just a few months before the COVID-19 pandemic and would lead to lockdowns across the world. The bleak future where people are too afraid to leave their homes and shelters due to the dangers that awaited them outside of their personal sanctuaries became very real very fast. Should we have connected? That's the singular question that kept echoing in my mind over and over leading up to the release of Death Stranding 2, because it is a question we as species have been asking ourselves every day. With the dawn of telecommunications and especially the internet, we've transformed the world from one of relative isolation to constant, potentially dangerous connectivity. Much good has come about from the bridges we have built across the globe, but these bridges have also given many evils the opportunity to invade our homes, our minds, and our hearts with wicked abandon. The evil of disinformation, the evil of targeted bullying, the evil have filled the world with so much noise, the soul is grounded and smothered, drowned and tortured, until even the home becomes a hell on earth. Where can I turn for peace? Where is my solace when other sources cease to make me whole? When, with a wounded heart, anger, or malice, I draw myself apart, searching my soul. These are the words to a very famous church hymn, speaking of a peace that is increasingly hard to find these days. The worst part is, it's not some grand or malicious evil that's smothering the peace that we all need to maintain a healthy heart and soul. The great evil of the internet, of building bridges that will never close, is the constant noise. 24/7 news constantly telling you about some new tragedy taking place, often in some part of the world you will never even see with your own eyes. Friends finding reasons to reach out to you, to distract you, to guilt trip you, to make you feel like you're a terrible person because you do not have the time or emotional capacity to please everyone you've formed a connection with. And don't forget about the new video, the new short, the new game, the new book, the new comic, the new song, the new art, the new tweet, the new piece of information that will surely change your life if you can shove it down your throat and fit it in your soul along with everything else you've crammed into your gluttonous mind. It's too much. It's too much. It's too much. Should we have connected? The answer, of course, is an obvious yes. Connections make life better. Connections give life meaning. Nearly everything in life is made better via connections, be it because humans are social creatures that are gratified when we share what we like with others, or because we are the direct recipients of that which can only be made through connections. A movie is the product of connections. A video game is the product of connections. This essay, from the way you are viewing, listening, or reading it, is an exercise in connections. It is shared through the modern system of connections known as the internet. All of this, impersonal it may seem, is an attempt to form a connection to you. There is a ton to be said about connections, made clear by the fact that we're so deep into this essay. Good things, bad things, interesting things. Death Stranding 2 was marketed and sold on the promise that it would be a game that examines the value, the danger, that which makes connections worthwhile and so destructive. And in the end, we barely get any of that in Death Stranding 2. Should we have connected? Death Stranding 2 features three antagonists, two of which return from the first game. The first antagonist is the world itself, which is more easily overcome thanks to the new tools introduced in this game. The second is Higgs, who is an entertaining villain, but also one that spends most of the game in service of the narrative's main villain, APAC. APAC, as it is revealed towards the climax of the game, is a fused entity created from a void out that swallowed up 4,000 souls and a computer system. The end result, a fusion between human life and computer intelligence to create an AI-like system who seeks to protect and control humanity from the shadows. Through the expansion of the global chiral network, APAC too grows in capabilities, finally revealing itself to Sam as it attempts to enact its grand design near the end of the game. Sam, who shows a rare display of independence, asserts that he doesn't want himself and humanity to be reduced to sheep by the AI human network of APAC. Unfortunately, it is too late for Sam to do anything, and all hope would be lost if were not for the sudden arrival of Die Hardman, one of the supporting characters from the first Death Stranding game. A return that leads to a great speech from Die Hardman, extolling the virtues of connections and living life to its fullest, despite its dangers. A speech that also reveals that the entire evil plot from APAC was foreseen and already thwarted by Die Hardman from the shadows, resulting in the immediate defeat of the human AI entity. All of this happens within 15 minutes, by the way, around 30 to 40 hours of gameplay, if not more for completionists. The grand reveal of the game's true villain, their motivations, their evil scheme, and their defeat all happens within 15 minutes at the hands of another character who has not been seen for the entire story until now. Should we have connected? What was the downside to forming connections and expanding the chiral network? None, or at least none that couldn't be resolved within the span of a couple minutes. The game actively rewards you for forming connections, and at no point is there any punishment or detriment for forming deeper bonds with the crew of drawbridges or the citizens of Mexico and Australia that you serve as a porter. The closest thing to a drawback is the grand reveal that APAC is more nefarious than they let on, but they are defeated with a literal wave of a hand from Die Hardman. Death Stranding 2 was sold on a lie. This game is not an examination of the value of connections, not in any meaningful way, not beyond the simple, widely accepted premise that connecting with others will improve your life. Kojima, the genius who has made the career of making interesting games that are interesting because they always had something interesting to say, has finally made a game that doesn't have anything interesting to say at all. If anything, this is a game that is not only offensive because of its vapidity, but because it talks way too damn much. Let's talk about Dolmen and how he might be the single worst character Hideo Kojima has ever made. There have been many bad characters throughout the history of fiction and video games. There have been bad characters throughout the works of Hideo Kojima, but not even the likes of Jar Jar Binks or Scrappy Doo have come to annoy me as much as Dolmen. It's not just his story either. It's the fact that Dolmen actively ruins what made Death Stranding 1 so brilliant. A component that shows that even Hideo Kojima can fall victim to trend chasing. Given the discourse surrounding the character, there isn't Dolmen's story that hasn't already been said. But for those who haven't played the game or need a reminder, it goes as follows. Dolmen was a father who took his young daughter to see the BT, the deadly ghost of his late wife. Idiotically, despite the fact that BTs are known for the rampant hostility, despite knowing that he could potentially trigger a void out by allowing himself and his daughter to come into contact with a BT, Dolmen and his daughter go to speak to her. Can you guess what happened? Just like what happens if a father and his daughter were to jump into a pit of hungry lions, Dolmen and his child are killed. As luck would have it, his daughter's spirit would come to possess the body of the doll that she always carried around. Dolmen, doing the one thing that made even remotely redeemable, used his spirit to push out his daughter from the doll, allowing her to pass on peacefully into the afterlife while Dolmen's spirit remained behind, leading to the living doll who helps us in the game. You'd be hard-pressed to think of a dumber character than Dolmen, but that's not the worst of it. The worst part of Dolmen? The fact that he takes away from that which made Death Stranding 1 so special. The peaceful tranquility of exploring a silent world, broken only when Kojima is ready to take your breath away. Let me tell you the exact moment when many players realize that Death Stranding 1 is a masterpiece. Order 14, package delivery to Port Knot City. This is the true end of the tutorial for Death Stranding. The player is tasked with using everything they have learned thus far to travel to their biggest destination yet, the place that will end the first act of the game. It is the longest and hardest delivery yet, forcing the player to overcome steep cliffs and the growing threat of BTs. This is a journey made largely in silence, save for the soft patter of rainfall and the noises made by your BB unit along the way. However, for the brave players who overcome this challenge, they eventually reach a cliff that overlooks one final descent leading into the presumably safe sanctuary of Port Knot City. As the rain stops and Sam's hoodie comes down, the silence is broken with the beautiful song, Asylums for the Feeling, leading to one of the game's most powerful and unforgettable moments. A challenge overcome, a journey completed. Silence, starving the soul for the precious noise we call song. This pattern, this gameplay loop is repeated several times throughout Death Stranding, and always to great effect. The songs hit hard because you go so long with hearing so little, making the music, the cutscenes, the moments of interaction with other people feel like a well-earned reward. The soul seeks these moments to escape the sense of isolation and quiet that sets in, giving players the courage to press on and overcome the mountains, rivers, and BTs that are in their way. When it ain't broke, don't fix it. Good advice for life, and advice that Hideo Kojima failed to follow with the introduction of Dolmen. Dolmen removes the isolation that made Death Stranding 1 surreal. Dolmen robs you of the precious silence that the soul needs in this modern age of never-ending noise. Dolmen might not be a literal monkey hanging on your back, but he is a constant annoying presence who rarely has anything meaningful to say. Even worse, Sam doesn't even talk back much to Dolmen, meaning that Dolmen is only there to have a conversation with you, the player. And that sucks. a lot. Why? Video games are meant to be a form of escapism from many problems of modern life. And what does that include? Escaping conversations from people you really don't want to talk to, which isn't the case with Death Stranding 2. One more note before we move on to the next chapter. Dolman is egregious for these reasons listed above, but also because he represents Kojima doing something that his fans don't want him to do, and that's trend chasing. In recent years, there's been an uptick in games relying on companion characters who are constantly talking to you. That wouldn't be a problem if the characters have something interesting to say, or the development of the relationship is the core of the game's story. Some games do it well, some games do it okay. And what you think of this aspect will depend on your personal gaming preferences. But it's really hard not to look at those games and their critical reception and wonder, given Death Stranding 1's underwhelming review scores, if Dolman is there because of a mandate for a Mimir-like character. After all, Sam even originally hangs Dolman on his back, just like Mimir, only for Dolman to make a comment highlighting how he'd prefer to hang out front instead. And with all that said, congratulations, we've now reached the halfway point of this analysis of Death Stranding 2 on the beach. Thank you so much for sticking with me thus far and indulging these thoughts of mine. If you want a place to take a break, then I would do so here. Grab something to eat, use the bathroom, walk around a bit, and remember to get some fresh air today. The rest of the essay will still be here when you're ready to return. When you do return, we'll discuss how trend chasing doesn't just stop with Dolman. Let's talk about how one of Death Stranding 2's biggest problems is that the game is really just more of the same as what we, the players, experienced in Death Stranding 1. There's a famous saying around Hollywood about sequels that goes something like this: sequels cost twice as much to make and earn half as much money as the original. While this has largely proven to be untrue in the world of movies, it's actually been rather accurate when it comes to the gaming industry, at least when it comes to audience reception. The eighth generation of consoles proved to be a spectacular one, seeing either the introduction, revival, and reimagining of many great series: God of War, Spider-Man, Doom, Horizon Zero Dawn, Monster Hunter World, and of course, Death Stranding are a few titles that come to mind. We pick these titles because they all have something in common. Their sequels have been seen as less impactful than their prequels, despite being evolutions in almost every way. God of War Ragnarok, Spider-Man 2, Doom Eternal, and Doom The Dark Ages, Horizon Forbidden West, Monster Hunter Wilds, and now Death Stranding 2 have all failed to achieve the same highs as their predecessors. Why? What's up with these underwhelming sequels? Why, despite having expanded gameplay and prettier graphics, do each of these games fail to surpass the games that came before? Hideo Kojima himself actually has the answer, and all we have to do is look at the Metal Gear Solid series. The Metal Gear Solid series is extraordinary for many reasons, but one noteworthy aspect of the series is just how fresh and different each game feels compared to the last one. That is largely because each game in the series features a different main character, a different setting, significantly different gameplay mechanics, and widely different themes that make for unique and compelling stories. Did you notice the word I kept using? Different. But I didn't have to use that word. In fact, that's a pretty good synonym that you would have used to describe each of these games when they came out. That word, one of the most loaded yet important words in the English language, being the word new. Life is lived in pursuit of the new. Buying brand new is almost always worth buying more than used. We change the clothes we wear and how we do our hair to try out new styles. We seek out restaurants we've never been to before to try and experience new culinary dishes. What happens when a franchise gets stale? Replace the actors, change up the plot beats, and suddenly you're getting a new take on Superman or Spider Man, even though the previous actor is still alive and willing to do the job. There's just one problem. As much as we desire to experience the new, we are also intimidated by it. The new is scary. The new can hurt us. The new can ruin a good day and make us feel terrible for wasting our time, our money, even our reputations if we try to share the new with others who aren't ready for the new. When the new is accepted, it is praised and venerated, but when the new is rejected, it is cast out and stomped underfoot, tossed into the gutter and left to die a sad and lonely death. Ergo, the new is widely welcomed in the circles of the indie, for should the new fail, few will mourn its loss. But in the corporate world of big business, where games cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make, where a single flop could lead to thousands of jobs getting cut, what is the value of the new in the face of the old, yet familiar and reliable? Slow and steady wins the race, said the turtle to the rabbit, which is all well and good until you realize you can't go home until you watch the turtle cross the finish line. Once again, it is difficult to identify the biggest problem with Death Stranding 2 when there are so many to choose from. Leading up to its release, much aplomb was made about what Kojima assumed to be the controversial nature of the title. In an interview with musical artist Woodkid, who produced some of the best songs in Death Stranding 2, Woodkid explained that Kojima changed some aspects of Death Stranding 2 because it was scoring too well with playtesters. Really? Did Kojima really go for the fences? It's really hard to argue against the idea that Death Stranding 2 is easily the safest sequel that Hideo Kojima has ever made. Here is the formula for the modern sequel. Take the original, make it bigger, make it prettier, make it more bombastic, make it easier, and you have yourself a safe winning bet. Sure, some of your customers are going to complain about you playing it safe, but you'll make your money back, and that's what really matters, right? Did you enjoy making deliveries in Death Stranding 1? Well, now you have more places to deliver to, and more ways to do it. Oh, did you find Death Stranding 1 too difficult? Yeah, there's new enemies to fight against, but there are more ways than ever to easily dispatch them. Rewards that you wouldn't get until near the end of the first game are now given near the start. Environmental challenges that would bring players to the halt in the first game are now easily overcome with new upgrades in the second. Did you think the story of the first game was too confusing? We made the story in the second game easier to understand. Did you love those moments in the first game when you would be rewarded with a song for completing an important order? Guess what? We got more of them than ever, featuring a mix of songs from the last game and new songs for the new game. But is it really new? Is it different enough to feel new, or is it really just the old with a different coat of paint and a few upgrades to try and make the old feel new again? There are many ways that Death Stranding 2 commits this offense, but the most egregious example of just doing the same old thing over again occurs in the finale. A good and proper video game does benefit from having a final boss fight, and for the most part, the final set piece that takes place on the beach against Higgs is good. The problem is that, exciting and bombastic as it is in the moment, it doesn't take much reflection to realize that Kojima was just doing the same kind of Kojima ending again for, what, the fifth time now? Why five? Well, stop me if you've heard this one before, but Metal Gear Solid concludes with a fist fight between two shirtless men on board an elevated platform against a fiery background. Metal Gear Solid 2 concludes with a katana fight between two men on top of Federal Hall to decide the fate of a child the protagonist is responsible for. Metal Gear Solid 4 concludes with a fist fight on board an elevated platform between the protagonist and the shirtless man against the sunset. Death Stranding does not conclude with a final boss fight against Higgs, but it does feature a fist fight against him near the end of the game. And Death Stranding 2, final fight between two shirtless men on an elevated platform against an orange backdrop wielding electric guitars as weapons. Kojima is widely respected among the gaming industry for bringing the new to a stagnant world that increasingly plays it safer and safer every year. The fact that Death Stranding exists at all is testament to the fact that he is willing to try that which we would call the new. But as Kojima has progressed further and further into his career, it's become apparent that he's also come to rely on some tricks far too much, even to the point of hypocrisy. During the course of producing this essay, Hideo Kojima gave an interview to the Sense fashion company to discuss his latest work. In this interview, he accuses other big budget gaming studios of playing it too safe, to the point of making games that are tremendously boring. Well, it's hard to call Death Stranding too boring, but saying it isn't safe is akin to the pot calling the kettle black. And we haven't even gotten to something that critics of the game have almost universally criticized, even those who adore Death Stranding 2 on the beach. Let's talk about two of the most awful characters Hideo Kojima has ever created, Neil and Lucy. If I had a nickel every time a female psychotherapist cucked the main character in the works of Hideo Kojima, I'd have two nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Cucking you, the player controlling the protagonist, that's just one of many terrible aspects when it comes to describing two more awful characters in this game's cast of awful characters, Neil Varner and Lucy Strand. Where to start? Well, let's start with Lucy because she was actually one of the more interesting characters in Death Stranding, despite never making a physical appearance. Lucy is a catalyst for much of the story, as she was the former psychotherapist and later wife of Sam, originally hired by Bridget Strand to provide counseling to her adoptive son. It was her supposed suicide that would define Sam's initial character and motivate him for much of the game's story. Hideo Kojima, for better or worse, has a bad habit of going back and retconning stories that he established in past games. Sometimes this works for the better, as is the case with Metal Gear Solid 3, contradicting much of what we knew about Big Boss and the Patriots. Sometimes it's for the worse, as is the case of much of the supernatural in the MGS series being written off as a result of nanomachines and parasites according to Metal Gear Solid 4 and 5. Death Stranding 2 absolutely falls in the worst category. Whereas Death Stranding 1 was a fascinating character study of how a character lost their mind and will to live due to the crazy world they found themselves in, Death Stranding 2 makes Lucy out to be one of the most immoral and stupid characters in the Death Stranding universe. Lucy Strand may arguably be the worst psychotherapist to have ever been depicted in a work of fiction outside of serial killers like Hannibal Lecter. In Death Stranding 2, we find out that Lucy Strand started a sexual relationship with not one, but two of her patients at the same time. Those patients were Sam, our player character, and Neil Varner, who serves a similar role in Death Stranding 2 to the mysterious ghost soldier in the first game, Cliffhanger. That's right. With our main character and connection to this universe being Sam, it turns out that our player character might have been cucked. For much of the game, we're even left to think that the baby that Lucy was supposed to give birth to could possibly have been Neil's kid, not Sam's. This makes Lucy both an immoral person, for reasons I really shouldn't have to explain, and an idiot, because she was knowingly cheating on the adoptive son of the president, the most powerful person in the world. Whereas the Lucy of Death Stranding 1 was a complex character who you feel pity for, a normal person just trying to survive an insane world that she couldn't endure, Death Stranding 2 makes most of the commentary and focus around Lucy a conversation about her two timing relationships. There have been some over the years who have accused Hideo Kojima of being sexist, misogynistic, and overall a bad writer when it comes to women. It's easy to disagree with that argument because some of the best female characters in gaming have been featured in Kojima's works. Meryl Silverberg, Sniper Wolf, Olga Golukovich, The Boss, Eva, and Strange Love are all fantastic female characters beloved by the gaming community, while more controversial Emma Emmerich and Paz Ortega are fascinating characters as well, albeit with certain problems that make them somewhat problematic for reasons better saved for another essay. But Lucy Strand? Lucy would have been a good off-screen character if Death Stranding 2 remained true to her depiction as described in Death Stranding 1. But instead, we somehow got an even worse version of Rosemary from Metal Gear Solid 4. At least Rosemary was only faking it and had a somewhat legitimate reason to try and lie to the government, whereas going to her mother-in-law, the president, for protection would have been the smartest course of action for Lucy Strand. But the stupidity doesn't stop there. It's not just the fact that Death Stranding 2 ruined one of the most interesting characters in the series. No, it's also the fact that Hideo Kojima took one of the most interesting aspects of the first game and did it a whole lot worse in the second that makes the game so painful. But before we can explain why Neil Varner is such a terrible character, we need to discuss the man whose shoes he is filling in for, Cliff Unger. Cliff is one of the most important characters in Death Stranding 1. Throughout much of the game, Sam and us, as the player, experience flashbacks of Cliff interacting with a baby in a BB pod. At first, we are led to believe these are BB's memories, but over time, we come to realize that these are Sam's memories of his father, Cliff, coming to see him when Sam was in a BB pod. Not only is this a great mystery with a surprising twist, but these memories also inspire Sam to be more loving towards BB, eventually naming her Lou and ultimately accepting the responsibility of being Lou's father. That was the narrative purpose of Cliff. But Cliff also served a great gameplay purpose as well, serving as a checkpoint at major points throughout the game. Cliff will occasionally challenge the player in combat missions that take place in recreations of World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War. They're an exciting change of pace and always a treat whenever they occur throughout the game. So what did Hideo Kojima do in Death Stranding 2? The same thing over again, but unlike other aspects of the game, everything that has to do with Neil Varner is worse than everything that happened with Cliff Unger. In Death Stranding 1, you feel pity for Cliff because you understand he is a father who's simply trying to reunite with his lost child. In Death Stranding 2, you're happily beating the hell out of the bastard who slept with your character Sam's wife. In Death Stranding 1, we see how Cliff's flashbacks help Sam become a better father and caretaker of his own BB unit. In Death Stranding 2, Neil's flashbacks do little more than explain a conspiracy that has basically nothing to do with the events of the story. Even from a gameplay perspective, the fights with Cliff in Death Stranding 1 are so exciting because of how rare combat was in the game, while the prominence of combat and shooting in Death Stranding 2 means it's just more of the same old thing you've already been doing throughout the story. We also need to talk about Neil Varner's design and his role in the marketing. There's no mistaking it. Neil Varner is purposefully designed to look like a modern Solid Snake and was depicted as such in the marketing leading up to the game's release. Luca Marinelli, the superb actor for Neil Varner, even had to be corrected by Kojima when he saw the character's design, thinking that he'd been asked to play the protagonist of the Metal Gear series. With that being the case, it almost feels like Death Stranding 2 was Kojima's way to try and stomp out the legacy of his most famous character. Solid Snake is a gruff and cynical soldier who reluctantly serves as a spy to save the world from nuclear destruction. Neil Varner, as it is revealed, is a reluctant soldier who works as a smuggler to sneak in brain-dead mothers into the United States for experimentation. Solid Snake is reluctant hero, whereas Neil is a nearly irredeemable idiot who ultimately gets himself and Lucy killed. In fact, it is revealed that he is the BT that would trigger the void out that ruined Sam's life, a final insult given what he'd been doing with Lucy leading up to their deaths. Why? Just why? Having such awful, immoral, and stupid characters doesn't in itself make a story bad. But the difference between the likes of Lucy and Neil when compared to other works of fiction, or even other characters in Kojima's early works, Metal Gear series, like Huey Emmerich, is that the salaciousness and stupidity of Kojima's characters usually serve the story and themes a lot better than they do in Death Stranding 2. Here are a few examples to prove the point. Rosemary is a good character because her entire character revolves around the question of what is true in a world full of disinformation and totalitarian government regimes. Rosemary originally lies in Metal Gear Solid 2 in order to seduce and manipulate Raiden, then tells lies to hurt him so she might protect both Raiden and their son in Metal Gear Solid 4. Otacon, confessing that he cucked his father, is off-putting in Metal Gear Solid 2 until it is revealed in Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker and Metal Gear Solid 5 that Huey Emmerich is a spineless, cowardly monster, a serial liar and manipulator who even murdered his first wife. Getting cucked by his own biological son is the just rewards for the life Huey lived, and his subsequent suicide upon learning the truth is a product of both the humiliation and regret over all of the awful things he did over the years that led to his death. In a series where making peace with one's own mistakes, and Huey ultimately failing in that regard, such a plotline is meaningful and contributes to the greater Metal Gear Solid series. You don't have to like Rosemary's or Emmerich's plotlines, but even those who don't like those aspects of the Metal Gear Solid universe can recognize that Kojima was trying to say something with these story decisions. But Lucy and Neil, it is difficult to come up with something to say regarding these clowns and their destructive relationship. So please, leave a comment explaining if you do like them as characters. Bringing us to my final major point of criticism for this flawed game. Let's talk about the complete and total mishandling of grief, trauma, and loss in Death Stranding 2. This channel has been in the works for a while. But why did Death Stranding 2 end up being the first work of fiction picked for analysis? Inspiration came from the incredible Susie Hunter and an essay she published to her Patreon. So please check out her work and consider supporting her if you're looking for other great commentators covering the world of video gaming. But what did she say that kicked off this essay? A key point that Susie made in her critical analysis was her complaints about the shared trauma that haunt the crew of Drawbridge. Sam, and Fragile by extension, lose Lou at the onset of the game. Dolman loses his daughter, while Tarman loses his son. Until Rainey and Tomorrow join, every member of this crew has effectively lost a child. And yet at no point in the game does Sam show so much as a hint of empathy, of pity, or even of mutual understanding with any of the other characters. They all share this same common tragedy, and Sam fails to show so much as an iota of attention and interest in their collective trauma. Which is a problem because a huge core of this game is supposed to be about how we overcome loss and grief. At least that's what the game states it's supposed to be about. But it really does next to nothing to provide any insight into this tricky yet critically important subject matter, especially in a world trying to overcome the collective grief and loss that comes with emerging from the COVID-19 pandemic. Because the problem isn't just Sam. The fact that he refuses to share his thoughts or talk things through with the other crew members is a huge issue with the narrative regarding grief, though part of it can be blamed on how he spends the first half of the game believing Lou is still with him. No, the bigger issue is that Tarman and Dolman have both already overcome their grief over everything they've lost by the time we meet them. Imagine going to a math class, but instead of being taught equations, you're only given the end results for the problems you are given. If you want one for numbers, imagine going to book club and finding out that the group is judging the book solely on the last page and skipping everything that came before. There's no value in this. Destinations matter, but the destination isn't going to be anywhere near as enjoyable if you skip the entire journey to get there. Dolman states, during a pivotal scene, that he and the crew of Drawbridge are there in part to help Sam cope with the loss of Lou and move on. Thing is, their treatment is to effectively just let Sam figure things out on his own, with no one offering any sort of advice beyond telling him that they too lost their kids at some point. Did they struggle with depression? With delusions? Were they suicidal? Did they take medication, pick up new hobbies and outlets, or resort to other means to cope with their grief? Who knows? Because outside of lore dumping their backstories on Sam, none of them have anything helpful to say about their personal tragedies. But the worst of it all? It's one thing for Dolman and Tarman to hold back. But Fragile? Many of the other characters in this game are badly written or poorly thought out. But Fragile is the character whose potential was most wasted due to the undercooked writing of Death Stranding 2. By the end of the game, you find out that when Fragile and Lou were attacked at the start, Fragile was actually killed. However, because Fragile was shot on the beach, her death was partially delayed. While her days were numbered, as if she had been diagnosed with a terminal disease, Fragile was at least given a reprieve that she resolved to spend with the man she had grown to love. Sam. What's my big problem then? Despite knowing she is dying, that her life would come to an end soon, Fragile barely interacts with Sam at all during the course of Death Stranding 2. Outside of carrying out their missions and operations, Fragile just doesn't spend time with Sam. She doesn't join him on his deliveries. She doesn't invite him to hang out with her. The only hint we get of her affections is that she will sometimes sneak up and spy on him while he is asleep. That's it. That's how fragile a woman living out her terminal life, her dying days, is going to spend her time, creeping on a guy suffering from severe trauma over the loss of his child. It wouldn't be so frustrating if it wasn't for the fact that, just like leading man Sam Porter Bridges, Fragile is also played by a major Hollywood actress, Lea Seydoux. Therefore, one is again left to wonder if the lack of involvement from Fragile is something to do with the fact that one of the most important characters in the game is played by someone who probably was too expensive and not as available as you wanted to film all of the scenes you wanted with her. Even if that was the case, the game would have greatly benefited from Fragile sending more text messages to Sam or inviting him to play a game or take part in some activity that didn't require her to speak or extensive performance capture recording. But now we're just hitting the same kinds of problems over and over again. At this point, there's little more to say that hasn't already been said, be it by this essay or by other essays out there. There's a host of side characters whose stories were not mentioned in this essay. But this analysis was never meant to be exhaustive. The goal was to hit the biggest issues with Death Stranding 2, and given how long this analysis wound up being, it would be fair to say that there is more than enough meat on the bone for you and I to chew on. It's about that time to wrap things up. Death Stranding 2 on the Beach is not a bad game despite how long this criticism is. Far from it. There are plenty of good things about this game that weren't brought up simply because this is meant to be a criticism, not a review. The gameplay loop is enjoyable. Every actor who took part in this game provides a great performance. Higgs was an absolute riot. And the music? It's hard to imagine someone who isn't moved to tears by at least one song in this game. Even the ending. While being a repeat of Kojima's greatest hits, it's absolutely unforgettable. The game was good enough that the idea of a sequel is tantalizing, especially since it will likely star tomorrow as the protagonist if a Death Stranding 3 ever gets made. When it comes to the greatest developers in the gaming industry, Hideo Kojima absolutely ranks amongst the most important. His works will always be worth paying attention to, and his announced slate will continue to be covered by this channel, be it OD or Fizzant, or a potential Death Stranding 3. There are many reasons to show up day one to play whatever Kojima and his team releases next. But Death Stranding 2 has shown that Kojima, for all of his brilliance, still has some bad habits he needs to overcome if his next game will be a masterpiece. The trend of focusing on Hollywood performers is becoming more and more of a detriment, and sanding down the rough edges of Death Stranding 1 made Death Stranding 2 less compelling. Even worse, Kojima's need to over-explain himself led to some truly terrible characters. And in his need to make things exciting, Kojima resorted to using some old tricks that he really needs to put to rest. Will Hideo Kojima learn the lessons he needs to make his next big project a masterpiece? Who can say? But now that we've formed this connection, my mercenary friend, you can count on me to share my thoughts whenever it releases.
And that concludes my first video for this channel. Thank you so much for watching to the end. As this is my first video, feel free to leave any thoughts or feedback you have in the comments section, especially when it comes to your feelings regarding Hideo Kojima and Death Stranding 2. If you leave a comment and subscribe, you'll also be entered into the channel's first giveaway, where you can win one of two $100 gift cards that you can spend on Steam, Nintendo, or PlayStation. Thanks again for visiting my channel, and I look forward to sharing more with you in the future.